So there was a disturbing new book on Patricia Hearst by, I think, Jeffrey Toobin. I know that you testified on her behalf, I believe. Yeah. I wonder if you can comment.
Well, what I testified in the Patricia Hearst case was that she was put through an extremely crude thought reform-like process. Mm-hmm. It wasn't at all systematic the way the Chinese communists did it, or even to the extent that many cults in the United States might go about it trying. But she was, after all, kidnapped and put down in a closet for some weeks.
This was February 1974 for all the young people who may not know the story.
Yeah,
young heiress.
And she was threatened, and she had an avenue of guilt, being a Hearst, a daughter of extremely rich family and privileged, and a family that had been rather reactionary in a political sense and had done lots of dubious things over the course of a long time. So the group that she was kidnapped by, called the Symbionese Liberation Army, SLA, consisted of about 10 or 15 people.
Right, micro-cults.
A grandiose kind of cultic group, and it had a charismatic leader who was black, and there was a lot of easy white guilt toward blacks that was exploited. And certainly Patricia Hearst was vulnerable, given her background, her family, and perhaps the stage of her life where she was at the time. So, of course, she could, under pressure of this kind, she could come to internalize convictions and attitudes, and even join in a bank robbery. Things that she would never have dreamt of doing without this thought reform, like crude kind of coercive pressure.
They even gave her a name, or she took the name Tanya, I believe.
That's right, Tanya. So a different name to become a different person. There could be legal arguments. One could argue that she should never have been tried, but rather one could have looked at something, since she joined in a bank robbery that could be seen as a guilty act under extreme mitigation.
Right.
And in that case not tried. So there are legal arguments in terms of where the case might or should have gone. But the idea that we could put no significance on the kind of process to which she was subjected is simply untrue, and doesn't really fit with what we know psychologically from so many other situations. In a way, the psychological understanding, and there were several other psychiatrists who testified, and psychologists, that psychological understanding was probably not entirely wasted, because although she was convicted, she lost the case. And that was partly because her lawyer, Bailey, didn't really conduct the case as effectively as he should have.
Right. He didn't even do the brainwashing defense, did he?
He half did it. He had both a brainwashing and a gun at the head defense. The gun at the head defense wasn't sufficient, because she didn't run away at times when nobody was watching her, when she could have. So she had to have internalized something. But you can't claim both defenses without their canceling out each other, and that's what more or less he tried to do. In any case, she was convicted, but she was eventually pardoned. And I think the psychological testimony that took note in a psychological way of what she had been subjected to was, over the long term, useful in her being pardoned. So
I was asked by the Department of Justice for the National Amber Alert Conference to talk about why Elizabeth Smart and J.C. Dugard, who had both been kidnapped and both had been with their captors and given a new identity, why they didn't run away, or why, when the police had them, they kept saying, "That's not me. You think I'm somebody else, but that's not me." When it was really them.
Yeah, yeah.
So I explained the dual identity, and I
Right.
explained breaking down the core sense of self and indoctrination, and everybody in the room thought it made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we've on some levels made some progress, but on other levels, I think the general public still doesn't understand.
The Patricia Hearst case became a vast media show, and also an arena of great ambitions. There was F. Lee Bailey and his ambition, known as the greatest defense lawyer. He can get anybody off. And the district attorney had political ambitions in convicting her. In a way, her not being tried would have been the most humane approach. And then some sort of revelation of what she'd been through and what psychologically that could entail. But there was too much ambition and too much media excitement on the, in that whole case for that to happen.
And so because she was of a wealthy family, if they didn't apply justice, then it would have looked like they were giving special favors.
Yes, there was a lot of hostility toward her as the daughter of an extremely privileged and wealthy family. And in a sense, we always are suspicious of the offspring of privilege, often with good reason. But in this case, misdirected because she had been kidnapped and brutalized.
So I guess if you were on the stand defending someone who was a victim of undue influence and thought reform, and the judge was saying, "Dr. Lifton, so are you saying that intelligent people can be deceived and manipulated to adopt a whole nother identity and do things that are antisocial?" You would say,
intelligent people are adopting other identities and doing things that are antisocial all the time. It's not a new combination, and it's useful to learn about these manipulative processes and to give them some recognition. And the legal system has to contend with these, but I would acknowledge that it's a difficult question because there are gradations, and you can't just equate elements of coercion or influence with non-culpability.
right?
So one has to have standards of legal culpability, but one has to understand how people can be changed by coercive methods.
Right. So in the case of Patricia Hearst, if I had my say, I would have, and she did go to trial, I would have said she's guilty, but not sending her to jail, maybe sentencing her to 2,000 hours or 10,000 hours of community service, explaining what happened to her to prevent other people from getting influence to do illegal things.
That's right. That's where our legal system has to expand in a humane direction. It does sometimes. I used to testify during the Vietnam War and in terms of anti-nuclear groups on behalf of some protesters, including the Berrigans in there, pouring blood on nuclear weapons or on draft records. And I try, but usually the courts would limit my testimony to the sentence hearings. But at least I could say what the general atmosphere was and why they embarked on this behavior, what they meant to convey by these symbolic acts. And that could have some significance in terms of how they were sentenced. So in that way, the court system, I mean, there were one or two cases where one had receptive judges where they allowed this kind of testimony in at the main court procedure, and we could make progress. But the court, that's an example of slightly expanding capacities of the legal system in a humane direction, and we do need more of that.
Right.